I'm so very happy to be invited once again to be present with you to celebrate and commemorate the life and times of Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. I first came to Tanzania as a student on the 9th day of December 1984, when I was a student leader at the University of Nairobi, and the then President of Kenya invited me, among other students, to accompany him, and that is when I met Mwalimu Nyerere. I then, 10 years later, in 1994, visited at the invitation of Professor Harub Othman on the occasion of 40 years of celebration of leadership in Africa, and that is when I formally was introduced to Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere and his foundation. It therefore gladdens my heart that I'm in the country of a man whom I admire and in a hall that is named after another great African, the Osagyefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. The subject that has preoccupied us in the last few days is one that is as topical as it is relevant: the rise or fall of Africa on account of the African politician. And in order to do justice to that subject and to remain faithful to my chosen subject, which is a call for hygiene in African politics, there is a sense in which one must take a historical journey, if only to appreciate the factors that animated Africans to seek to regain their independence from the colonial masters. Historians will remind us that we were first enslaved, that Africans were taken, and this we seldom say. The first civilization to take Africans out of this continent were the Arabs. And they took Africans from the eastern coast. And it is sad that in that part of the world, there are not many Africans who remained, because it was in the business of the Arab enslaver to castrate Africans. We never say that, but we must say it because it is historically significant. Then the Europeans came, the Portuguese came, the Spaniards came, the Germans came, the French came, the Belgians came. Africa became the hunting ground for the European colonizers, and we were the spot. Our ancestors built the United States of America. Our ancestors built Europe. And when slavery had lost its shine and sheen, the Europeans abolished it, but they replaced it with yet another pernicious enterprise: the colonization of Africa. The Europeans sat in Berlin, in Germany, in 1884, and they looked at the map of Africa and parceled it out. The British had their share, the Germans had their share, and Tanzania or Tanganyika was their share, as was Rwanda and Burundi. The Spaniards were Johnny-come-latelys in the arena, and they got little Equatorial Guinea and Southwest Africa. The French were here, the Portuguese were here, and we were colonized. This time round, they did not take us away. They came here, and they controlled us, And they told us, not in so many words, that we were children of a lesser God. And we were treated as if we were children of a lesser God. In fact, they told us that on the day of creation, we were merely hewers of wood and drawers of water. And if anybody were to doubt it, in 1948, it was more blatant when Hendrik Verwoerd instituted the apartheid regime in South Africa. But yet there is a sense in which the God that we worship never sleeps. The colonial enterprise ran its course, and the European tribes, the Europeans never called themselves tribes, they called them nations, were engaged in a war. First in 1918, the European tribes fought, and they had something called the League of Nations, which died. Then they fought again in 1945. And what is unique about the European nations is that when they are engaged in tribal wars, they call them world wars. So there was another war between 1945, 1939, and 1945. And after that, a new kid on the block, the United States of America, took the lead in saying that colonialism was something that was undesirable. But at that time, Africans were never quiet. Those who had been taken out had already started agitating. Many of us here will remember Marcus Garvey, of whom Bob Marley says, Garvey was a buffalo soldier in the heart of America. And many of us will remember W.E.B. Du Bois. Many of us will remember that they started agitating that Africans must regain their dignity and their independence. And indeed, in 1847, in Liberia, a small group of Africans were brought back in Monrovia, and Liberia became the first independent black nation in the continent of Africa. So soon thereafter, in Sierra Leone, they also created yet another colony. But Africa was colonized, except Ethiopia, which they tried to take in 1938 and exiled Professor Dr. Haile Selassie. And unfortunately, they were defeated, as you remember, in the Battle of Adwa. Africa can defeat European tribes. This history is necessary that we are able to appreciate the freedom that we gained. So that Garvey came, W.E.B. Du Bois came, but there was another crop after the 1940s who had had the advantage of European education. And there were people in Europe also who are beginning to recognize that indeed equality was necessary. And this was not anything new. In 1776 in the United States of America, the American state sitting in Philadelphia in the United States of America declared unto themselves that all men are born equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A few years later in France, after the revolution, they also recognized that we were to be equal, so that the colonized nations which had now taken Africans thought that they were safe. They had taken Leopold Sédar Senghor from Senegal to Paris, and they thought that they were creating a little Frenchman. Little did they know that they were creating somebody who would want to overthrow them. They took Félix Houphouët-Boigny from Côte d'Ivoire, and they thought that they were creating somebody who would be subservient to them. They took Ahmed Sékou Touré and Modibo Keïta, and they thought they were safe. Little did they know that they were creating the future leaders and agitators against French colonization. And it did not stop there. The Portuguese also took Agostinho Neto and Amilcar Cabral and Eduardo Mondlane to Lisbon. Little did they know that those individuals would be the catalyst that would be necessary in the process of decolonization. The British also had their fair share. They took others. They took Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere, Hastings Kamuzu Banda, Kenneth David Kaunda, and many others to the United Kingdom, Jomo Kenyatta. Little did they know that those would be the individuals who sometimes later, and in Ghana, of course, they took the Osagyefo, Kwame Nkrumah, and in Nigeria, they took Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sultan of Sokoto. There is a sense, therefore, in which these individuals started recognizing that having been enslaved, having been colonized, we now had to liberate ourselves. And the agitation started. And Kwame Nkrumah and his Ghana acquired independence in 1957. And I still can hear Kwame Nkrumah through the vicissitudes of time saying in Accra, Ghana, that Ghana is free and will never be colonized again. But the freedom of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not free. I can hear Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere saying that he is prepared to delay the independence of Tanganyika so that Tanganyika, Kenya, Uganda would become independent at one time. Mwalimu could see the future with the exactitude of a Jewish prophet. Jomo Kenyatta and Obote could not. And therefore, we gained independence as separate states, and the story will be told shortly. So what do we see? The agitation, the demand by the people that we must be decolonized. And why is it that we were asking that we must be decolonized? Why is it that we were demanding that we must regain our independence? Because throughout the ages, it was always the divine plan that men must be masters of their destiny. And when we gained our independence, the leaders of the day were eloquent as they were clear that the reason why we were asking to be independent is because we wanted to take charge of our affairs. We wanted to be the governors. We wanted to have our young men and women acquire education. We wanted to control the production of our food through agriculture. We wanted to build our infrastructure. We wanted to improve the quality of the lives of our people by improving their health. We wanted to eliminate poverty. We were clear on what we wanted, and this message was as clear in West Africa as it was clear in East Africa, as it was clear in Central Africa, as it was clear in Northern Africa, so that if you listen to Kwame Nkrumah, it's as if you'd listen to Agostinho Neto, and if you listen to Neto, it's as if you'd listen to Samora Moses Machel, and if you listen to Ahmed Ben Bella in the Maghreb, it's as if you'd listen to Patrice Emery Lumumba. There is a sense in which there was unanimity that this was the only way, and we attained independence. And I remember so very vividly in 1957 in Casablanca, Morocco, was it in 1960, when the then 8 independent African countries met on the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, was clear that we must ensure that everybody else regains their independence, and that we must remember that the colonial master is not asleep, and that if we don't unite, he'll come under other guises through the neo-colonial project. But they listened to Kwame Nkrumah not. And even before they assembled in 1963, in the month of May in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, no sooner had countries started attaining independence than the neo-colonial project started taking root. And in 1960, the first coup d'etat and assassination took place in Togo when Sylvanus Olympio was eliminated. 1 year later, Patrice Emery Lumumba was eliminated. So that in 1963, in the month of May, when 32 heads of states and government assembled in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, there were several speeches, but 3 speeches stand out. Kwame Nkrumah's speech, Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere's speech, and Emperor Haile Selassie's speech. Haile Selassie was the host, and his inimitable style, he reminded the congregation who are present in Africa Hall in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, that was a momentous occasion, and that the long-term health of Africa not only required but demanded that Africa must pull in the same direction, Haile Selassie said. And Mwalimu took the baton from Haile Selassie and repeated the same words, celebrating the fact that we were independent and we had the opportunity of determining in our affairs. But the greatest of the speeches was that of the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah had a sense of urgency which everybody else did not have. He said, not in so many words, but in effect, that if we want to immunize ourselves from the diabolical machinations of the erstwhile colonial master, now turned neo-colonizer, we have to move here as one Africa, with the United States of Africa, with one army, with one currency, with one central bank, and with one nation. But they listened to him not. They had started getting used to the trappings of power. So what they came out with on that day in the month of May 1963 was a weak organization of African unity, the OAU, which many commentators were quick to describe in many ways and many times as the toothless bulldog. It was never a dog. It did not have teeth, but the effect of it is that it did not do very much. Some say it was a talking shop. Mzee Warioba, who was then active in political life and in other sectors, will attest to that. Yet later, we were to create another body, the African Union, and we'll have something to say about that. So we come out of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in 1963, clear as to what we want to do. The African politician begins to emerge. We have them in different parts, but they begin to show characters that are totally inimical to our expectations. You of the Swahili say, maskini akipata matako huliambwata. Maskini walipata matako zililiambwata. They started getting used to the trappings of power. And we started having countries which we thought would liberate us. And I'm talking about the hygiene of the politics. It started disappearing. Many of these individuals now thought that they were demigods, suffering from what I call the Messiah complex, thinking that they had been brought to Africa to liberate her, and that they suffered from 2 major diseases. One of them is the martyr syndrome, and the other one is the Messiah complex. They think that their countries owed them. Africa started producing leaders that one cannot recognize. How many of you will forget Jean Bedel Bokassa of Central African Republic, that man who murdered little children in the streets because they did not buy uniform from his wife, that Jah Bedel Bokas. How many of you will forget Mobutu Sese Seko Kumbendu wa Nzambanga, who changed his country's name and presided over a kleptocratic regime? The Democratic Republic of Congo is the richest resource country on earth. Conservatively, it is said that under her belly, she has minerals, which is equivalent to 34.1 trillion United States dollars. And yet today, it is one of the poorest nations on earth. It is the only nation on earth which on the day of the election has its president saying, we know we ought to have elections, but we have no money to hold elections. When you see a country which has as its official name the Democratic Republic of Congo, know that there is no democracy. In fact, I dare say that any country, two countries that I know insisting on having as a part of their official name the Democratic Republic of something are never democratic. The other one is Korea, the People's Democratic Republic of Korea. It's as if when you can't graduate to be a doctor, you go to the church and you ask to be baptized as Dr. Mwadime. But that is not the point. The point is that who can forget Mobutu Sese Seko? Who can forget Idi Amin of Uganda? Who can forget Mengistu Haile Mariam of Ethiopia? And one can go on because hygiene had started disappearing from African politics. Our agriculture was beginning to suffer. European musicians who had a little sense of guilt came to perform in Africa, Bob Geldof, to free the Ethiopians out of hunger. There was no hygiene in our politics. We could not run our education systems. Our young men and women were going to India because the budgets meant for education were consumed by individuals whom we had entrusted with the task of presiding over it. Our health sectors were beginning to collapse. And as I've said before, the political leadership did not have any faith in those institutions. Typically, the typical African politician, perhaps not in Tanzania today, if they were sick, they had a cold, they would not go to Muhimbili, they would go to London. If they were Kenyan, they would not go to Kenyatta Hospital, they would run to the United Kingdom. Tragedy. No hygiene in our politics because Africans had started engaging in theft. In fact, I used to say that African politicians were thieves. Then I went to Uganda and I was told that they are not thieves, they are looters. And when I went to Liberia last week, I was told they are not looters. I was told they are looters on an industrial scale. That is the logical metamorphosis of the African politician whose appetite for public wealth is completely insatiable. Hygiene was disappearing from African politics. And we could see the effect of the disappearance of hygiene in African politics. But there was always the erstwhile colonial master to assist. Coup d'etats started visiting Africa. Modibo Keita in Mali was consumed. Nnamdi Azikiwe in Nigeria was consumed. Diosagie for Kwame Nkrumah was consumed. Apollo Milton Obote was consumed. Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau was consumed. Patrice Emery Lumumba was consumed. Coups were so frequent in Africa that Afro-pessimists were now hard to say that coups were as frequent as breakfast. But even breakfast was not frequent on African tables. We could not feed ourselves because there was no hygiene in African politics. Your typical African politicians took the view that they had a divine mission to preside over their countries. They arrogated to themselves the monopoly of wisdom. If you listen to some of them, and I listen to the radio announcements announcing the activities of one leader of an African country, Habyarimana Juvenal, it would take 3 minutes to say the thing that he had done. He was the leading farmer. He was the leading singer. He was the leading intellectual. He was the leading husband. And he was the leading everything. We had monsterized our leaders, and they became immune from any kind of advice. Meanwhile, the African was suffering. The African woman who thought that upon attainment of political independence, she would now deliver in a decent hospital was still the victim of a village midwife. The African woman was suffering. The African woman who thought that they would now get water in a tap in their homes was still running 5 kilometers away to get water. Meanwhile, our monster leaders were laundering their clothes in France and in Paris. The African woman who thought that they would go to Kariakoo market here in Dar es Salaam or Owino market in Kampala, Uganda, and get all the goodies could not get them because meanwhile, the Minister for Agriculture had agreed that bad seed be supplied, and meanwhile, we were getting mangoes from Europe. The African woman who thought that they could have food on the table could not have food on the table. We had killed all our sugar industries that we may have sugar from Brazil and Mexico. And the African youth was no different. The African youth who thought that upon realization of independence, there would be occasion for them to get employment was now being humiliated at the embassies of the United States of America as he struggled to get the almighty green card. The young African who thought that liberation would bring something new was now struggling at the United Kingdom embassy, filling a document that is 50 pages long, being asked who their great-great-grandfathers were and what enterprise they were engaged in. And they could not stop there. They went to the Australian embassy and to the French embassy, and the treatment was the same. The African youth was being treated like a leper, like a pariah, like a subhuman being. And they were asking, for what purpose did we gain this thing called independence? And those who are not humiliated in Gambia, in Nigeria, in Niger, were crossing the Red Sea, swimming across the Mediterranean to go to Italy so that they may be enslaved anew. Meanwhile, the African leader was busy looting from their countries and buying mansions in Paris and in London and in Florida, and driving private jets and helicopters and being addressed as their excellencies and honorables instead of being addressed properly as horribles. Hygiene had disappeared in African politics. And what had started happening is that a new generation of African leaders who were dissatisfied started emerging. And one need only look at Africa in the 1980s when we begin to see the emergence of a new crop of leaders who are saying, this is not what we fought for. And I can remember so very vividly Ethiopia's Meles Zenawi in 1984 abandoning his medical studies and pursuing the Deg regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam, and he removed Haile Mariam. And there is a sense in which some hygiene has been reintroduced in Ethiopia. And I can remember here, God works in strange ways. Idi Amin made the mortal mistake of assuming that Tanzania and Mwalimu Julius Nyerere could be poked without consequence. He tried, and he died regretting it. And this became, indeed, many of you will remember that this University of Dar es Salaam became the finishing school of latter-day revolutionaries. John Garang de Mabior was here. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni was here. If they were not students, they passed through here because this was the mecca of political revolutionaries. Eduardo Mondlane was here. Samora Machel passed through here, if only for a few hours. Nelson Holisa Mandela passed through here. Sam Nujoma came through here. This was the baptism ground. And the high priest was Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. It was he who, in a manner of speaking, said, "With this water I thee baptize, that you may go out there and change your country." And Yoweri Kaguta Museveni went out into Uganda, and there is a sense, whether you like it or not, in which some hygiene was introduced in that country. There is a sense in which when Samora Moises Machel left this ground, he went to Mozambique, and there was a sense in which some hygiene was introduced in that country. There is a sense in which John Garang de Mabior left here, and some hygiene was beginning to be introduced in South Sudan. Right now, the story is a little different, but one can see that there was this new crop of leaders who recognized that indeed we had to do something about it. But ladies and gentlemen, what had happened over the years? Let us ask ourselves the fate of Africa. Why I say that there is a need for political hygiene. Africa today has 54 odd countries. And allow me to take you through a tour of Africa, if the moderator will be gracious enough to give me latitude. When you start from the Cape in South Africa, there is a great country which has given birth to great men. 1912, the first political party to be founded in Africa, the African National Congress of Sir Albert Lutuli. That party has given birth to the Mandelas, to the governing Mbekis, to the Reginald Oliver Tambo. There was great pain during the apartheid regime, but wisdom prevailed upon President de Klerk. And in 1994, we created what was called a rainbow nation. Mandela had his honeymoon. Then came Governor Mbeki, or Thabo Mbeki, the son of Governor Mbeki. Then came Jacob Zuma. I do not know where Jacob is taking South Africa. But from where I am, there is need for hygiene in South Africa, because that is a great country, and that is the anchor of Southern Africa. Nelson Mandela left a country that was called the Rainbow Nation. Today I'm beginning to hear them talk about the Zulu and the Xhosa and the Pedi. It is your own Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere who says, katika karne ya 21 mnasema tupande basi la makabila, hiyo ni ujinga na upumbavu. Then there is another country, because there is need for hygiene in African politics. And when one talks about hygiene, one wants to see improved agriculture. One wants to see improved infrastructure. One wants to see improved education. One wants to see that the quality of the life of our women and children is improved. And you go to Namibia, there is a sense in which there is some hygiene there. If only the land question could be solved, that would be a country that is worthy, is moving in the right direction. One can begin to see that. Then you move to Angola, that unfortunate land of Agostinho Neto, and you will remember Holden Roberto and Jonas Malheiro Savimbi. There is a sense in which that country was traumatized. I'm happy to note that President Dos Santos now says he's going to retire in 2018. My only concern is that he is sick now, and he is seeking treatment in Madrid, Spain. Why don't they have a good hospital in Luanda, Angola? After you've been a president for 20 years, you are going to another civilization to treat you. There is a sense in which there was lack of hygiene. Then you go to Botswana, that great country. In 1966, Botswana was a backwater country with nothing but courtesy of an individual who knew that hygiene depended and required that you improve the quality of people's lives. Sir Seretse Khama. And you know, when you have hygiene, even the politics becomes hygienic. And you realize that politics is not a life and death issue. That politics is a question of the competition of ideas. I've just read a Tanzanian newspaper here which I thought was very insightful. Siasa ni kupambanisha hoja sio vioja. And there is beauty in that. And Nyerere put it even better in much more eloquent Kiswahili than I can master. He said, kwanza tutambue ya kwamba ikulu ni mahali patakatifu. But I'm still talking about Botswana, Seretse Khama, Ketumile Masire, Festus Mohai, and Ian Khama. They now know that politics is not life and death. That is a country where there is hygiene. For those who are Afro-pessimists, who think that nothing is happening in Africa, something is happening. They are monsters, but they are also angels. But did they not exist like that even in the heavens? Lucifer alongside Michael and Gabriel? It would appear that as it is in heaven, so it is on earth. And if you go to Mozambique, you can also begin to see that there is a problem there, but there is an attempt at hygiene. You go to Zambia, that is another country, Kenneth David Kaunda. On the day that he left office, Kenneth David Kaunda had only $8,000 in his account. If you ask your typical African Tanzanian councillor today, before Magufuli came in, that was pocket change. After 24 years in power, $8,000 only. Those are people who love their country and sacrifice. There is a need for hygiene in Zambia. It is the only country in the world that I know where when an opposition leader blocks a motorcade, it does not become the offense of obstruction, it becomes the offense of treason. Unprecedented in the world. Hygiene is necessary in that country. And I look forward to hygiene being introduced. Then one comes to Tanzania. You know, Tanzania, when one talks about hygiene, one must start in the 1960s. One must remember the Arusha Declaration and the nobility of the intentions of Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And that is why many of you may not know, but at one time it was suggested that he be made a saint of the Catholic Church. And the reason was very simple. This was a man who had ideas. This was a man who had clarity of thought. This was a man who could see the future almost with the exactitude of a Jewish prophet. This was a man who had the humility, almost like the humility of the carpenter of Nazareth. This was a man who loved his country. He made mistakes, and when he made them, he realized and corrected them. That is his greatness. Is it not Saint Just who said that nobody can rule guiltlessly? This is a man who found 120 plus ethnic groups and welded them into one nation, so that Tanzanians speak with one voice. You know, if you look at Tanzania and you ask your typical Tanzanian, what was the ethnic extraction of President Kambarage Nyerere? They do not know and they do not care. If you ask Tanzanians what was the ethnic extraction of the second president of Tanzania, Mzee Ali Hassan Mwinyi, the Tanzanians do not know and they do not care because it does not matter. If you ask them what was the ethnic extraction of the third president of Tanzania, Benjamin William Mkapa, they do not know and it does not matter and they do not care. And if you ask Tanzania what was the ethnic extraction of your fourth president, Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, they do not know and they do not care. And if you ask them what is the extraction of your fifth president, John Pombe Magufuli, they do not know and they do not care. They only know that he's a bulldozer. But you go to my country, Kenya, God save my country. God save my country. When you meet your typical Kenyan and you introduce yourself as John, they'll ask for the second name, not that they may know your full names, but that they may identify you with your ethnicity and pigeonhole you accordingly. When you go into that country, which is a great country in prospect, but which is being destroyed by negative ethnicity, you ask them who the first president of Kenya was, they'll tell you it was Jomo Kenyatta and he was Kikuyu, and we care. We want our Kikuyu president. And if you ask them who was the second president, they'll tell you it was Daniel Arap Moi of the Kalenjin extraction, and we cared because it was our turn to eat. And if you ask them who was the third president, they'll tell you it is Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, and he is a Kikuyu, and we want him to continue because we Kikuyus and we Kalenjin only feel safe when one of our own is in State House. And if you ask the opposition and you ask the leaders from my own ethnic group, the Luo of Kenya, the Luo will tell you we have been marginalized for too long. The time has come that God must smile upon us and our son must be the president. And if you ask the Luhyas, they'll say the same thing. That is the tragedy of gigantic proportions. I'm submitting to us that the country called Kenya needs political hygiene. I'm submitting to us that the country called Kenya needs to come to Tanzania here on a benchmarking tour, and that the President of the Republic of Kenya and all our parliamentarians should sit at the State House and be lectured by John Pombe Magufuli on the finer points of governance. Of course, Mzee Warioba will be there, and other stalwarts will be there. Salim Ahmed Salim will be there. Great Tanzanians will be there. And Nyerere will remind us, katika karne ya 21 tupande basi ya makabila, ujinga na upumbavu, because it can destroy a nation. there is need for political hygiene in Kenya. Right now in Nigeria, the Igbos want to secede, and they are being warned by the Yorubas and the Northerners. There is need for political hygiene. But let me also say one of the things that relates to hygiene. Aside from negative ethnicity, there is another thing that has killed Africa and taken away political hygiene: corruption. You know, it would appear that we of the Negroid blood relate very poorly with this thing called money. Money is a useful facility that enables you to do things with ease. But if you allow money to control you and you begin to adore money and you acquire appetite for money, then you are in trouble. And I want to submit to us that Africa is the only continent in the world where upon appointment into political office or upon ascending to the political office, it's as if you have won a lottery ticket to sudden wealth. In Africa, when you are appointed a minister, even the newspapers will say, if you are appointed to the Ministry of Finance, he's been appointed to the lucrative Ministry of Finance. If you are appointed to the Ministry of Agriculture or Mining, they say you've been appointed to the lucrative Ministry of Mining. But when you are appointed to the Minister of Culture, they say you've been appointed to the lean Ministry of Culture. In other words, there is a sense in which institutions in Africa appear to believe that he who gets into public office has a license to be a thief. And if you look at many African countries, many African leaders cannot account for their wealth. They have stripped their countries naked. You know, when I look at some of the great leaders of Africa, some who will not be remembered so very fondly by history, I regret. Robert Gabriel Mugabe of Zimbabwe. Nyinyi Waswahili mnasema wali wa kushiba huonekana kwenye sinia. In 1980s, when Mugabe took power, it was said of him that he had the largest number of degrees of any leader in the world, and he had degrees. It was said that he was a passionate revolutionary, and he was a passionate revolutionary. It was said that he had liberated Rhodesia, renamed Zimbabwe into a great country, and for the first 10 years he did a good job. Then something happened. Different commentators have different ways of saying. Some of them say that Sally died and he married Grace and it has never been the same again. I do not know. Some of them said that he became a prisoner of some of his comrades. I do not know. But the only thing that I know is that all the historical dividends he had accumulated have now been squandered. Why? They have been squandered because Robert Gabriel Mugabe now presides over a country where there is 90% unemployment. Robert Gabriel Mugabe now presides over a country which does not have a currency but has a central bank. This is unprecedented in the history of modern civilization. I'm submitting to us that corruption has been at the very heart of the destruction of Africa. That is why we do not have roads. That is why we do not have good hospitals. That is why we cannot feed ourselves in Kenya today. We and Ethiopia, we are importing maize from Mexico. In Liberia, they're importing chicken from Brazil. And in many countries, we cannot even feed ourselves. We do not make our own medicine. Medicine is made as generics in India. We do not even produce our own seeds to plant our fields. They are being made by Syngenta and Monsanto. We do not produce anything because of corruption. But there is a sense in which one can begin to see some hygiene. There is a sense when I arrived here in Dar es Salaam and I look at the newspapers and I see a white gentleman having flown into Tanzania in a private jet from the company called Acacia, goes into State House in Dar es Salaam and literally almost saying, mea culpa, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Nimekosa sana, nimekosa sana, nimekosa sana. And President John Pombe Magufuli, as if he was a Catholic father, saying, nimekusikia mwanangu, nimekusikia mwanangu. Tutakuhurumia lakini kwa masharti. Na masharti ni ya kwamba lazima ulipe ulizozipora. I felt told that there is an African leader who can stand up to international pirates who for 20 years have deprived Tanzania of taxes that would have gone to schools, taxes that would have gone to the health sector, taxes that would have gone to infrastructure, taxes that would have gone into agriculture. John Pombe Magufuli is a breath of fresh air. I know that there are some Tanzanians who may think that he's disrupting their agenda. John Pombe Magufuli disrupt their agenda. For if you come into a country and you find a patient suffering from cancer, you've got to subject them to chemotherapy. And when you administer chemotherapy, the hair will fall out a little. There will be some pain. That pain is necessary because there is no gain without pain. I'm not a Jewish prophet nor related to one. I'm not a member of CCM. But if John Pombe Magufuli continues on this trajectory and has a second term, in the next 10 years, Tanzania will be one of the largest economies in this country. God save John Pombe Magufuli. You know, I was reading a tweet and some American is saying, bring us John Pombe Magufuli. And I was in Kenya and I said at one time that we need to Magulify Kenya. In other words, there is a sense in which a new English word can be found, the Magufulification of Africa. In fact, I dare say that even my own paper, instead of calling it a call for hygiene in African politics, I would say the Magufulification of Africa. And I would still be right. But the whites say that one swallow does not make a summer. There are other good examples in Africa of the beginning of the introduction of political hygiene. Ian Khama in Botswana. Ian Khama in Botswana, it is said that a minister in his government went to him and said, I've been named in a scandal, Your Excellency, help me. He told him, there is nothing that I can do. The individual went to his rural home. The following day, it is reported that he had committed suicide. I'm not a sadist, nor do I intend to be one, but if there are such individuals, I want more suicides. Ian Khama is yet another breath of fresh air. Paul Kagame of Rwanda, 1994, the United Nations turned away. The Rwandese, within 100 days, anything between 800,000 and 1 million Tutsis and moderate Hutus were killed even in churches. Then there came a tall, lanky man, Paul Kagame, and his comrades in arms. I was there 2 days ago, and one of the best drives out of any airport in the world is to be found in Kigali, in Rwanda. And you can see, so that those who thought that Africans cannot do it, our color is innocent. The Negroid, the dark color is innocent. It is not in our DNA. No. What happens is that there are some within our ranks who are errant, who must be punished. One can go on, but even my own good friend Yoweri Kaguta Museveni found a dilapidated Uganda. And even if you say that Yoweri has now stayed a little longer, there is a sense in which history will remember him fondly. One can go on, but one must also remember that lunch must be served. And if one remembers that lunch must be served, one must also remember that there is the law of diminishing returns. And one must also remember that one must now grow to their conclusion, even as they are talking about a call for political hygiene. So I'm submitting to us this morning that Africa can be great and Africa must be great. But Africa will only be great if we Africans do that which is good and right. The great Indian nationalist Chakravarti Rajagopalachari said that when politics stumbles, the country pays. So the first thing that we must do is to introduce hygiene in our politics. And now that I'm in Tanzania, the first thing that we must do is to magulify our politics. I know that there is a Kiswahili saying, mgema kisifiwa tembo litia maji, and I'm conscious that one of the names of President Magufuli is Pombe. But I have no doubt that President Magufuli will remain on the right course. As you say here in Tanzania, atabaki kwenye njia kuu hata chepua. I'm suggesting to us that we introduce hygiene in our politics, which means, and Mzee Warrieba will remember when we were talking about the Constitution, Africans must begin looking at their Constitution, and they must be constitutions which address the African environment. You know, there was a time after the fall of the Berlin Wall when European powers from London, Paris, Madrid, and Washington told us that democracy is equals to multi-party politics. Democracy equals to this. I now hold the view that while plurality is a good thing, a constitutional review gives us an opportunity to come up with homegrown solutions.